The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
All right. Welcome to the Dukes Court tonight. I'm here with my co-host, Chris, Three-Finger Fletcher, Gary, the Oil Can Kinn, and I'm Dave, Dr. Strangeglove Finoli. Tonight we will begin the show talking about a rare occurrence that's taking shape in baseball this season. 6 times in Major League history, 3 teams have won 100 games in a season. Never all in one league. And this year that looks like it could possibly change. We have 4 teams on pace to finish with 100 wins. Yankees, Red Sox, Mariners, and Astros, and they are all in the American League. Is this just a strange twist of fate, or perhaps maybe the haves are overtaking the have-nots in a way that you generally don't see, except in the English Premier League, where about 3 teams have the ability to win every year. But if you take a look at it, I pulled up the TV contracts the other day, and the 4 teams we're talking about are in the top 7, with the Yankees, Red Sox, and Mariners coming in at 3, 4, and 5. Astros a couple down at 8. But interesting thing. Apparently, these contracts don't take into effect if or don't show the amount of money these teams get who have a owning interest in the networks they're on. And if you look down, the Yankees, who had started it all with the Yes Network, apparently just sold 80% of the Yes Network for $2 billion. The Red Sox own 80% of their network. The Mariners own 71% of their network. So basically, as we look at it, the reported $76 million a year the Mariners get and $80 million the Red Sox apparently aren't in the ballpark with what they're actually receiving. Fletch, you had asked earlier in the week as we were talking about this, what constitutes a small market team. In looking at these numbers, I would generally say it's the TV contracts that constitute what's a large market and small market team, and not necessarily the size of the market. Well, what do you think about that?
I would agree 100%. I pulled up the same numbers that you did, and it's interesting too that for the Pirates they're coming in at $25 million. There's some that say $20 million, but Fangraphix has them at $25. So you're talking about in some cases, almost 8 times more. For the Dodgers are coming in at $204 million. And there's also that ownership stake that you were referring to. And the Pirate contract is up at a time when both their ratings and their attendance are down. So it's going to be an interesting thing to see what happens with some of these negotiations. You look at what's happening with these 4 teams, and I think there's a few things going on with that. One, I think that the bigger teams now are using the informatics that have been championed by a lot of the smaller market teams. More so that these big budget teams are doing it, and they're doing it well. And the other part of it, too, I think that explains this, is the addition of that second wild card spot, because now you have that greater incentive for teams to win their division, and so they have to turn those good teams into great ones. It also can't hurt that a large chunk of the league is currently, looking toward the future and trying to think of what's going to happen with this next with this next season coming up. So, amid that climate, you see that these things happening. In terms of those 4 teams, the one that I think that may fall off is the Mariners. I think that they've had a pretty easy schedule thus far, but the other ones, I think they're pretty solid teams.
I would tend to agree, and you're probably right about the Mariners. As I was looking at them today, they really are not, their run differential is not indicative of a team that's going to win 100 games. So generally, over the course of a season, that evens out. The Pythagorean win-loss total that they're projecting now is 91 wins. So they're in essence playing far over their head, because the Pythagorean theory usually comes within about 2-3 wins by the end of the season. And they're playing well without Cano, but that pitching staff, as you look at it, except for maybe 1 or 2 pitchers, is not one you look at and think this is going to be pitching staff of a team that wins 100 games. So that's a fair point. But you make a great point about these teams using the analytics, the way that the lesser teams were using it and succeeding earlier in the decade. Do you think that is having a good impact on things, Gary?
I mean, I think there's a number of things going on here. Touch on all the issues you guys raise. I'm a little surprised. I'm stunned at the Seattle contract. I did not have a chance to look at those things that you guys did, but I'm stunned. Maybe it's because it's somewhat of a regional franchise. I mean, it's going to draw from Western Canada. There's been some talk, I guess, with the guy who's the quarterback up there, Wilson, about putting baseball in Portland. I have a hard time believing, after traveling to those cities years ago, that Seattle would agree to that territorially. I mean, it's basically a 250, 260-mile drive. I can't see that happening, but I'm stunned at that TV contract. That just shocks me, guys, that they're actually pulling down that much money. I mean, I think that does explain some of the moves that they made in the past when they knew it was coming for, guys like Cano and Cruz and guys like that had big contracts, that they were willing to take them on. It isn't just that they were trying to win, obviously. They had a revenue stream to deal with it. I mean, I think the analytics have really I'm not in love with that stuff like some people are, but I think with all the shifting, I think, some of the other teams in the American League, which basically kind of gutted the rosters to try to cut the payroll, Toronto, Tampa Bay, I mean, not Baltimore in a sense, but they're clearly going to do that this year. I mean, I think New York and Boston have piled up a big record. That division, to me, is very weak other than them now, and very poor. And, you're still playing, I don't think they're playing 19 games against each other, but they're probably playing 16 or 17. I'm sure that's part of the reason that these two teams have piled up a big record. And clearly, those franchises are signature franchises. I'm not really sure what we're ever going to be able to do about these TV deals. I mean, if you've got 12 million people in New York who can watch the Yankees, and you have, 4 million or something in the Pittsburgh metropolitan, I mean, you're never going to get the same value out of that contract. And honestly, I don't see the ownership groups there. I mean, it was amazing that, they were able to agree to have these taxes on payroll and stuff like that now to work with each other. I guess they saw a little bit more what the other sports offer, but I don't think that's ever going to change. I mean, I think the numbers have gotten so huge because TV drives so much, but Yankees have always had a huge radio contract with all the population from Connecticut down into Philadelphia and kind of out even to central Pennsylvania. I don't think that's going to change, but I do think it's contributing. I mean, I think, but you can't take away the credit that I think is due to particularly the Yankees in Houston out in the American League. I mean, their farm systems, they've got a lot more money coming in from all these sources that you guys referred to, but I mean, they are drafting pretty well. I mean, Houston tore the thing apart in a huge city that, I think is an average passion fan base, and they drafted extremely well. I mean, you look at guys like Springer and a lot of these guys. I mean, they made some deals here towards the tail end of this period to pick up, Garrett Cole and some others. But a lot of their stuff is homegrown, and the same with the Yankees, with Judge and all those Sanchez having a bad year and some of the other stuff. I mean, they can clearly go out and execute versus some of these other franchises. But, I mean, they're doing some things the right way, too, which I think is also putting them in the position that they're in. I think the biggest thing is, to me, is I think we probably are seeing a little bit of the big market, small market correction again. And I think or rather lack of correction, and I think if this continues for a while, you're going to hear more talk nationally and you're going to hear more talk in the game about fixing it. But I'm not sure you're ever going to fix it completely. I really don't. I mean, Fletch, as you point out, $25 million is what the Yankees probably get in 1 month from just the TV contract.
Right.
So, I mean, if you're looking to equalize the playing field in terms of cash flows coming in and stuff like that, I'm not sure you're ever going to be able to do it. And I think.
So, are we to believe that there's much more parity in the National League, given all of this?
Well, I mean, if you look at the performance so far, you would say that there is. But, I mean, I think that if you look at the National League in truth, though, I mean, Milwaukee's a pleasant surprise, but they went out and did what big market teams did. You know, they picked up Yelich, they picked up Kane, the guy from Kansas City. You know, they did with some big market teams because they felt they were close to winning. And so far, with some surprising arms like this guy Hader coming out of the minor league system, they've put themselves on almost a 100-win pace. Chicago, I think, is still a good team. Finally gotten hot again. That seems to be the pattern for them, other than the year they kind of ran away with everything. And Atlanta is a team that I think I'm not sure they're going to stay up there, but I mean, other than Freeman, and then some. I mean, obviously a lot of those guys are high draft picks, so I guess they're technically doing things the right way. I mean, I still can't figure out exactly what the heck is going on out west. You know, I think Colorado surprises me as to how mediocre they are after a pretty good year last year, and I think the Dodgers have had plenty of excuses like injuries and stuff like that, but they haven't hit either.
No,
and I think Arizona's probably the class of the division, but I mean that division to me has become kind of highly mediocre. That was a long way to go, but I think there is more parity in the NL, and I don't think any of the teams are as good, at least through the first third of the season, that we've seen New York and Boston be, or Seattle and Houston be.
I think the NL has more parity. I don't think it's as good as it possibly is showing right now. I mean, the Dodgers have had incredible injuries. I was looking at a breakdown of their payroll. They actually have higher payroll on the disabled list than the Pirates have for their entire team. So they've had a lot of problems there. Once they get the players back, I do tend to think they will be by far and away the class of the West. I think Arizona's good. I don't think they're great. I think San Francisco and Colorado are probably playing the way they're a little over 500 team, not better. Atlanta is the stunning one. I mean, if they have drafted like with those high picks and drafted like they had when they built the team in the 90s, maybe this is the year that they start to become one of the perennial playoff contenders again. Washington's been a little bit.
If you're not in a huge major market, or you don't have those huge TV and radio contracts or sponsorship, I just think, unfortunately, you're going to go through these periods where you're going to, you know, you almost have. I mean, there's too many franchises in many of these games, in my view. And if you've got 30 or 32 franchises, you almost have to go through a period of about 4 or 5 years where you're mediocre or bad, and you are putting the money that you do have and the disparity in money that you do have into the drafting. And you know, I don't think we're not going to see this type of situation. I think we're going to see this situation again, rather. I think we're going to see it in cycles.
So it's going to be interesting, though, with what happens, too, with the Pirates. I mean, that TV contract is up, and you have ratings going down, you have attendance going down. It's going to be a real interesting negotiation.
And the ratings are down significantly. I think they were down 33% towards the end of last season into this year, and that's a significant hindrance. I mean, when they negotiated the contract originally in 2010, it wasn't considered one of the premium negotiation jobs. In fact, I was stunned when I looked down and the A's had a $41 million a year contract they negotiated the year before the Pirates did. So I'm not hopeful. I'm not real hopeful at this point that they're going to get a lot of relief in that way going forward. It could be a struggle. And you look down, more and more teams are investing in the cable networks. I would say about half the teams get revenues through investment. None of those are subjected to any revenue sharing,
right?
Which is, I mean, you look at the Blue Jays and the Dodgers, both completely own their television revenues. Which, I mean, you know, when the Dodgers start out at $204 million every year, they're going to compete every year.
That's exactly right.
But you know, the other part of it, though, is look at how many teams have won championships. Though, I mean, you're not seeing the same kind of dynasties that you've had in football and you know, with teams like the Penguins in hockey. It's not a pure correlation. I mean, certainly they're going to do better, but we're having the money and the resources, but there's still that, you know, there's a good shake-up in terms of who was winning championships. The thing about it is, as Gary said, you have limited windows and you have very very, very slim chance of error. So if a team like the Pirates or a team like Milwaukee, if they miss out, if they have a bad free agent signing, or if they don't evaluate talent correctly, you can't be given big contracts to someone like a Polanco as early as they did. That kind of stuff will come back and bite you.
Right. But over the course of that contract, though, had Polanco, I mean, you were gambling. You certainly were gambling. Had Polanco, with Marte, they're probably going to save money over the course of the contract over what he would have gotten in arbitration. But Polanco, they made a mistake, and you're right. If the resources are limited as they are, that is certainly going to hinder that going forward. I don't mind how Nutting spends his money in pushing it towards the farm system, pushing it towards the scouting. My problem is I don't know that he's getting the bang for his buck the last 5-6 years, because I'm not so sure they have drafted as well as they needed to. They certainly didn't get aggressive into Latin America until this past year, over the last few years. And what you say is absolutely correct. They don't have a lot of room for error, and they look like they're making a lot of errors. So that's certainly not a positive sign for the future.
Well, I mean, it just seems. I guess it's a marketing thing too. I mean, if you're in a place like a Tampa Bay, where I was down there a few weeks ago, and it's clear that there's a problem, Dave, as I mentioned to you. I mean, it's a Sunday afternoon on a holiday. Yes, the team's going nowhere. They're playing Baltimore, who's probably won 15 games all year. If there was 8,000 people there, I'll eat my hat. So there's no interest at all. There, the only way you're going to get any interest in certain markets, I mean, New York or Boston, Cleveland, I'm not even sure about a Houston. Maybe in the American League, I could probably say, 3 or 4 cities you're going to have intense attention no matter what you do, even if they're bad. New York and Boston because of their size. Cleveland because it's actually a better baseball town. It has been for the last 20 years since that winning in the 90s. But nobody else in the American League, if you're not competitive over a consistent period of time, you're going to have gate problems, you're going to have sponsorship problems, something else. So the only assurance you really have is beyond, throwing money around when you think you're close and hoping that, you're gambling in the truest sense. I agree, Dave. The only real, guarantee you have is how good is my scouting and what kind of money I'm going to put into it. But Major League Baseball seems to – my dad was a scout, which is not an old war story, but my dad was a scout in the 70s as an umpire in central Pennsylvania for the Phillies. And this is when the Phillies had started to bring up guys like Mike Schmidt, Luzinski, guys like that. And he said, don't assume they're going to continue to do that. And I said, why not? He goes, they don't want to pay the scouts anything, but they're willing to throw $4 million bonus at somebody who might be a good prospect. And I think that's continued in baseball. I think it's gotten better, and I think some teams have realized that, controlling those operating expenses, no matter what the circumstances are, and not making a move by paying a guy completely past performance when you can see he's probably on the downside. I mean, you may make some mistakes with some younger players. It's more when you're making it with the guys who, quite frankly, even the casual fan watching a TV says, this guy's kind of at the end of his road. Why are we throwing all this money at him? I mean, the Phillies did that for years here.
Right.
So, I mean, to me, the only assurance you have in most of the markets in Major League Baseball, even Philadelphia, I mean, this is a huge market, but, and they're not competitive. They don't have any names. Nobody goes and nobody pays any attention.
Yeah.
So I got to believe Xfinity or Comcast or whoever owns them now and is part of that network, that's a big contract too, but I got to believe they're not happy with the return. So it gets away from the baseball field then. Then you go into the meeting at the end of the year and the people say, well, we paid you all this money and here was our return on it. You better do something else because with our investment in this team, we expect to get an 8-10% return. So you better get rid of that $14 million contract somehow. So, I mean, I think a lot of stuff is affecting the lack of level playing field that doesn't have anything to do with what's going on in the field or even the scouting. But, I mean, to me, if you take the 32 franchises, how many of them would you say are going to get huge attention? And if you were a network and you were counting on a guaranteed return or you were a big sponsor or something, you would say, if this team isn't very good, people are still going to continue to watch it. I would say that's probably 7 or 8 franchises. And a couple of them are in huge cities, like Los Angeles when you got 14 million people you're going to have enough people pay attention to it any time, even if they go 68 and 94. Probably in Chicago you are, maybe in St. Louis because it's such an intense place. New York, the Mets are always going to get attention. But Atlanta, Washington, Philadelphia, Miami in particular, no guarantee. Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. Pittsburgh's actually a better, support there than people give it credit for because it's probably one of the smallest cities, if not the smallest city in the league. It's pretty intense attention, but it just doesn't have the population growth or the amount of people watching or listening that you're going to generate huge revenue. Out west, LA and San Francisco have a passionate following. Turn the games on in Colorado on the package now. It's half full. People aren't really supported that much. San Diego goes in and out basically because they gut the franchise every 3 or 4 years. Arizona, I think, is still pretty good, but they're pretty good right now. When they weren't very good about 4 or 5 years ago, you could hear a pin drop in that ballpark too. So, the solution would be to tell these bigger franchises that they got to share those revenues. But honestly, I don't think that's ever going to happen. So I think that I don't know if it's going to get worse. If you believe some of the stuff that Manfred and some of these people say, the game's not that interesting and stuff to some other younger groups or whatever, that will drive the value of those contracts down if nobody's watching. But you'll still have the Yankees be outdistancing and Boston outdistancing everybody else. And the only solution you have is to develop a machine that you're doing the best scouting and you're working the hardest in that regard. And if you're not going to do it, you're going to do like sometimes you see the Angels do, Texas do, some of these other organizations. They're going to come in and out of competitiveness, and when they're not competitive, then you're going to see a gutting. And I don't really see it changing anytime soon, in my view. So
the other thing that happened too was, think about too how some of the rules changed around what you could pay your draft picks too, and some of the slotting that happened. That was a way where the Pirates did have an advantage, and that was taken away.
Yep. But I also think that once they saw what the Pirates were doing, the better teams eventually were going to do that. So I don't really think – I think it was an advantage for a while, but I don't know that there's any reason Boston 2 years later wouldn't have paid Jay Bell that kind of money – or not Jay Bell, Josh Bell that kind of money for being a second-round pick. But the concerning thing is I'm looking around here. You have half the league is averaging 25,000 and under, which is pretty bad for baseball.
It is.
And Tampa Bay and Miami, which kind of stuns me, I hadn't looked at this before, they don't even average 25,000 between them.
It's, I think, reading some of the stuff in the papers down there, I think that's Major League Baseball's biggest problem it's facing.
Well, don't forget, guys, that area of Florida, that's a spring baseball market. I've never really thought about them being a great full season market. Spring training is what people think about for Florida. The fans, it's hot as hell down there. Do you want to really be out there during the night watching a baseball game? It's not the most ideal place for baseball.
No, I don't think the amenities agree, Fletch, but they're bigger cities than people realize, though. The Tampa, St. Pete area is not as big as Boston, New York, obviously, but it's a lot bigger than people realize. And Miami's actually a fairly big city that goes all the way up the coast. And honestly, there is nobody paying one bit. Now, the problem is because I think those organizations have not, particularly the Marlins, have not done what we said we were going to do. For a while, they were doing it. They were after they got the World Series in the late '90s, they really started to draft really well with Beckett and Penny and all those pitchers and some other position players. But then they kind of got away from it. They went for the big names and stuff like that. They couldn't sell enough tickets. They didn't have a big enough TV contract. The interest wanes. Then they got to gut everybody. You do that 3 or 4 times. The casual fan, you lose. And Tampa did it too. There was really no reason. I don't know what the hell Souza was making and Morrison and some of those guys, but they were fairly competitive for a time last year. What did they do in the offseason? They got rid of everybody. People down there aren't going to pay attention to that then. And I think that's part of the problem, I think, with the disparity of the revenue, is it causes some of these teams to think, well, I'm close, I'm going to go out and do that. They don't compete. Something happens. Baseball's so goofy anyway with rollers getting through or a pitcher going down. You can't predict anything that really can happen with great clarity. Then all of a sudden, midway through the season or the start of the next season, then all of a sudden nobody knows even who's on the roster. You can't continue to do stuff like that. So, but I just don't have a solution. I find it hard to believe with what these owners pay. In 1950, if you bought a team for, I don't know, take a number, $5 million, it was still $5 million. Now, $5 million was worth a lot more in 1950 than it appears. But the bottom line is when you're paying, $200 or rather $500 million for a franchise and stuff like that, you don't have a lot of room for error there either. So, if nobody's paying attention and your network is screaming at you and your sponsors are screaming at you and you're not winning, you really have no choice but to do what we've been seeing. And I don't see somebody else saying in New York or Boston or LA saying, well, my TV contract's $200 million. I want a competitive league. You think they'd look a little bit more at the other leagues like the NHL or even the NBA. Well, the NBA, I guess, has some of the same problem, it seems, maybe for different reasons. But NFL and NHL, you think they'd look at it and say, well, let's kind of figure out what we can do about that kind of thing. But I just don't see it in baseball. I mean, the sports history since 1875 is not collaboration. Let's face it.
No, it's not.
Right.
I think it's something like this. I think this is making it. I think it is a factor in what we're seeing here in the AL.
Yeah, but the big markets at some point in time, if the attendance continues to drop, I mean, these are significant drops. I mean, you're looking at the worst attendance in 15 years, and having a league that is that out of whack on a continual basis, which I'm not saying it will be, but if this trend tends to go towards that, they're going to have to make some concessions. The only problem is to get it through the players, you're going to have to make the lesser teams agree to a ceiling salary cap. I'm not necessarily concerned about a maximum salary cap as much as
you need to have a floor is the problem.
Both. Yeah. Both. Or a floor, not a ceiling. I'm sorry, a floor one that you have to spend so much money. I'm not concerned about how high they go as much as I am forcing these guys to spend a little more money. But that being said, that's the only way you get that through the players' union, and the lesser teams are actually probably making more a profit taking the baseball welfare from the salary tax than they would be by doing that and then getting a floor salary cap. But they have some major problems, and it's not going to be solved by putting a runner on second in the 12th inning.
It is not
to make the game shorter.
No, it is not. I agree.
That's nonsense. This is what they're talking is nonsense, and that's the concerning thing. Is they're not looking at what the problem is, and in my mind, the problem is right now you have 9 to 10 teams that are gutting their teams right now. That's a third of the league. So a third of the league has no chance to win. A third of the league is giving its fans basically a quad A team at this point.
That's my feeling. And I think that's why we're seeing the reflection of the records, and I think it's going to continue for a little while. That's exactly how I feel. I mean,
well, the other part of it too is there's a whole generation of kids that are disconnected from baseball. I mean, when we were growing up, you play pickup baseball games. That doesn't happen anymore. You also have the inner city. The league had put a lot of resources into bringing baseball back to the inner city program. But you've got a disconnect of a whole generation who, you almost need to have another one of those seminal events where you have a Sosa and McGuire home run chase or something that's going to bring people back again, because there's nothing really dynamic that's happening right now for the casual fans to bring them back to this game.
No, they're.
Well, I mean, I think that's I agree, Fletch. I think that's a little bit of a different problem, though. I mean, I think that unfortunately the TV has, I think, hurt baseball to a great deal. Although the money is bigger from these TV contracts, there are so many things available now that baseball is just another option. And beyond the fact that kids aren't playing, I agree. They're not playing in the inner city. Here where I live in New Jersey, there was baseball fields that we would have killed to play on. There's nobody on them. Everything's an organized game too, so you're not around it as much, and you're not thinking about it. But I mean, I think the concern I have with that is baseball does a very poor job of marketing itself. Let's stop carping about the shifts and how there's too many strikeouts and stuff. Just shut up, in my view. Like, I mean, all you're doing is making somebody who doesn't have an exposure to it think, well, it sounds like guys are standing around for 3 hours. I'm gonna watch something else. I'm gonna do something else. I mean,
you're putting it in the head of people that didn't mind it before.
I don't think we need to criticize something that, quite frankly, has been a continuing business, despite these ups and downs. I mean, we all like the history here. I mean, these revenue disparitions and these the Yankees and the Dodgers and the Giants won pretty much every pennant in the 50s. Nobody complained then about how bad the game was. Now, there wasn't 32 franchises, so there wasn't the same gutting and some of the roster maneuvering that goes on now, and the dollars weren't as big. But, we go through cycles like this. But, I mean, baseball does just such a poor job of disparaging itself regularly, and I think this current leadership is bothering me too, Dave. As you know, I think we need to stop talking about that. Like, I think that kind of stuff just is hurting. In a world that people under a certain age want everything in an information block, if the only thing they're hearing is, these baseball games are taking way too long, and everybody's just standing around. Yeah, I don't love the way the game's played right now, but you got to adjust. I mean, that's why you're in major leagues. I mean, that's why you have major league franchises. Adjust to it. I mean, but to continue to criticize it, I just think that baseball's shooting itself in the foot a little bit. I mean, let's talk about how many great players there are right now. Let's talk about the fact that you got to have 4 teams that, quite frankly, could be stellar, even with the revenue disparities, some of that stuff. I mean, I think baseball just has never done the job that the NBA or the NFL or even now the NHL often does about selling its product. And they tried it a couple years ago with some of those ads where the guy kept talking about everything that was going on behind the scenes, but it was too much too fast in a 3-minute or 2-minute blurb. I mean, I honestly, they don't sell the history enough either. I mean, if you talked about the fact that we got these 4 great teams and this has never happened, so everybody should watch this. I mean, I honestly think you'd get kids and everybody else to pay a little bit more of attention, even in the cities where you've gutted a team like Tampa or Miami or some other places. So, I don't know. I am not worried that the game will not rebound, and I think you're right, Fletch. I think we need something. Maybe this will be the year with all these 100-win teams. You have a great playoff or something like that. Last year's World Series did some good. So did the Cubs and Indians, I think, when I've talked to people. Those series were wild and competitive.
They were. I mean,
but I do think
what the result is this year.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand. But I think I would not be disparaging the game as much and talking about
I agree with you.
rules and all that kind of stuff for something that's been that continuing of a franchise, no matter what business you're in, for 150 years. I mean, that tells you something right there. So,
and I'll throw one other thing in here that nobody's talking about, and people think I'm probably full of it, but right now you have Major League Soccer drawing 22,000 people a game that only 3 or 4 years ago was probably drawing about half of that. So, again, if you're looking at money the sports fan is spending, and the generation that we've lost, that I think we all agree with, is they're capturing. So, whereas it might not be a huge problem right now, if they don't do something, it's going to be a pretty big problem, because that's an incredible increase in attendance over a short period of time for that league.
Well, I think it'll go the way that baseball negotiations have always gone. There was talk a few years ago about contraction.
Yeah.
The Players Association went nuts. Wants more lost jobs. Well, the bottom line is, if they were smart enough and their leadership was good enough, they would say, well, a lot of you are losing jobs anyway. That middle-of-the-road guy that would make $3 or $4 million a year as his 4th outfielder who could really help a team, nobody keeps that guy anymore. His career's pretty much over when he comes to the end of the road. So if the Players Association wants 30 or 32 places to play, they're actually talking about expansion despite all this craziness. So I don't think it's as bad as maybe we see it. I know they want that short-term money in and everything else, but some of the cities they're going to go into, I think there were question marks. One of them didn't make it before in Montreal. Certainly have some concerns about an international city like Mexico City. And if you talk about Portland, I can't see that would ever help Seattle in terms of their continuing performance with the closeness and proximity. But the bottom line is that, to my mind, is I just think that you're going to have bigger problems before they're going to see real correction, because the groups still they get along better than they did, at least apparently, in the past.
Mm-hmm.
but they don't really communicate with each other very well still. And obviously the players really didn't have the players kept carpet about how nobody would sign them in the off season. They didn't really fully understand, at least some of them, and their leadership never came out and said, look, well, we had to agree to a deal. We agreed to this tax on the salaries. We got everybody's, average salary rates up depending on the value of your franchise. Now people are paying the tax, so there's going to be a correction. I mean, nobody really came out and said why that was happening. You had to figure it out yourself.
Well, the other part of it, too, is that the stats were showing that it was not a good return on investment for signing those players to those large contracts toward the end of their career. They just didn't get the performance for that money. And the players can call it collusion or whatever it is. All they have to do is look at the numbers and what's happened, and very few teams are going to take that kind of chance. It doesn't make any financial sense.
Right. I mean, I think the correction there was the short nature of those contracts. I mean, what was Martinez? I mean, Martinez was probably the best one that was the hardest one to understand why nobody wanted him, because he's not that old. And he's actually, his career trajectory, I don't have the statistical analysis maybe like you have, Fletch, but I mean, clearly he seems like he's gotten a little bit better over the past couple of years. Boston gave him, was it a 2-year deal or something? It was really short. So, I mean, that's a correction. And Arrieta's signing a 1-year deal in Philadelphia. If this was 5 years ago, somebody would have given him a 5-year deal for that kind of money.
Right.
So I do think there is some correction that way, and it might go back to the tax and all that kind of stuff. But, the players just never seem to understand you can't have your cake and eat it too. I mean, they never seem to understand that. I'm not sure the owners do fully either, but the owners are the ones who are making the investment. That's the bottom line. So, they do have the right to control the purse strings and stuff like that. The players do not. They think they do, but they do not. Now, nobody pays a C owner like they always say, but the bottom line is you are an employee. The players seem to forget that all the time. And I think that to me is something that it's going to have to get a little worse before it gets better. I don't think last year's off season is going to be that much of an aberration. I don't know how you guys feel. I think beyond what you said, Fletch, about the fact that this is it. Look at the Phillies. Even look at the Indians in the late 90s. I mean, they paid those guys for previous performance. They paid them big money, and they gave them longer deals. And what happened? The franchise
ends up being a bad
uncompetitive.
I think this offseason to see is a guy like Andrew McCutchen. How is he going to be treated by free agency? 3 sub-Andrew McCutchen years in a row, him expecting the $25, $30 million contract. Let's see what the negotiations are there. I think that'll be seeing his negotiations will be a sign of how baseball is looking at the off season. I think he's going to be in a Arrieta Martinez situation.
I do too. I think even more so. I mean, worse. I think he's probably not giving you the same potential power and some of the other things that the other guy brought. So he's clearly on the downside. But I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm maybe a little negative on baseball looking ahead and planning for it. And I just feel that we're probably going to see, we may not see 4 100-win teams, but we're going to see wide disparity. I think we're going to see some periods where there's some really bad teams. Maybe not losing 120 games like years ago, but, they're 88, 90 losses, and they're really not interesting teams. They really don't bring a lot to bring you through the gates. And there's a lot of those teams right now. But, I mean, I think that you guys have talked about the floor. The most offensive situations are not necessarily, to me, a Tampa, a San Diego, a Pittsburgh, some of those. I think the most offensive situations are like the White Sox, to me, have always been just, it's disgraceful. It's a huge market. Yes, they're second to the Cubs. Huge market. I got to believe that's a big TV contract, too. There's millions of people there. And as soon as the wind blows, Reinsdorf and some of those other owners would just cut the payroll and gut the team. And why anybody goes at all is beyond me. I mean, beyond the conditions and the cold and that kind of stuff. I mean, to me, that's clear. That's a clear move to do that. And there's less excuse for doing it.
Well, I think you can add the Mets in there, too.
I agree. I agree. I think, all his problems that were well publicized, Wilpon about, dealing with what was it, Madoff or whatever. I mean, who cares? Then, then get other partners in there or sell
the team. Yeah.
Right. Get out there, You couldn't take all the upside and all the downside as soon as the changes changed. Now, I understand return and all that kind of stuff. I do. But there's certain situations where, quite frankly, it's just so blatant. But, who knows? It would be interesting to be a fly on the wall during the conversations that the leadership of the game has with some of those kind of franchises and some of the smaller ones. It would really be a very, very interesting thing to kind of be behind closed doors to kind of find out the conversations that they're having. But what will fix it is I'm not sure the gate will fix it. I'm not sure the gate's that important, but what will fix it is the sponsorships on the outfield walls or behind the plate. I think what will fix it is the TV ratings go down and the interest goes down. I mean, that will cause a correction as well in the problem that we have. But, the bottom line is you're never going to get the same disparity in the way that the money really comes into this business now from the TV and the media in some markets. It just never will be that way. The only advantage that you have in the medium to small is the continued scouting and the continued investment. And you should be hiring the best people there, no matter what their price is.
I agree with that 100%. But
yep.
I do agree with you that I do think probably one of their half-ass decisions will be to add 2 or 3 more teams, especially when you see the success of the Vegas Golden Knights, which we'll pop on our next subject of the evening. We're coming off a season where we've never seen an expansion team compete like the Vegas Golden Knights had in the past. But I was sitting down looking at some of the past NFL draft rules for expansion teams, and I do think, they had a huge advantage. I mean, you were looking at one goaltender this year and 8 to 9 skaters at best, whereas just a few years ago in expansion, you were able to save up to 15 people. So that's 6 premium spots that they had to fill better players on the roster. Not that it should have ended up with the Stanley Cup final for sure. That was tremendous, but the NHL in my eyes, whereas and in '74 you were looking at giving them the 18th, 19th, and 20th best players on the team, which is why the teams were bad. But to me, from a business standpoint, it was a brilliant move by the NHL. They took a market that was questionable to begin with for hockey and made it a huge success that way. And while Seattle is a little more of a hockey market, they will be using the same rules when Seattle does their expansion in a year or two, and that should give them the opportunity to be successful early on too. We're looking at maybe some of the best expansion teams. I don't know that with the parameters that Vegas had this year, I don't know if I could call them one of the best expansion teams of all time. I was looking back, and the Bucks are the one. And again, in basketball, it's a lot easier to do because you pick one guy, and which is what the Bucks did. They went from 26 wins their first year, drafted Alcindor Jabbar, and got 56 wins the next year, and then made a great trade for the O. And in year 3, they won the NBA title. The Portland Trail Blazers kind of did it. They did it in 6 years, but again, built the draft quickly to win a title. And but when you're talking favorite expansion teams, with me it begins and ends with the Montreal Expos, Rusty Staub, Park Jarry, the swimming pool.
You just want to hear them say John Boccabella. That's what you want to hear.
Oh, John Boccabella. But but Gary, what do you think of what the Knights did, and maybe what are some of your favorite expansion teams?
We've talked about this a little bit on these things that we've done together. It wasn't a true expansion team. Yeah. I mean, everybody that played a role in the Knights' success was a regular NHLer.
Yeah.
Think about it. Every one of those guys drew an NHL jersey on a fairly regular basis, and that includes even guys like, some of the lower-level guys like Reeves. Reeves played probably 60, 65, 70 games for St. Louis, and Carpenter played about 35, 40 for San Jose. So, yeah, the league purposely decided, I guess, $500 million entry fee, worried about the market's condition, worried about the popularity in the game a little bit too, which had been falling a little bit, it seemed. They basically set up a deck that allowed them to draft an NHL defense core and a Hall of Fame goalie and a bunch of forwards who had a ton of speed designed for the current game. So I can't really call them an expansion team. And I think the melding of the personnel I think the coaching staff and McPhee and his people really putting together quite a unit. There's tremendous credit for that. They should sweep every award. But expansion team, I don't think so. And I think, there's talk. There's going to be a lot of rumbling, I think. It'll be interesting to watch if it gets out. The NHL hides its stuff better doesn't denigrate its own game like MLB does. I think a lot of franchises are not going to want that same rule. I don't think they're going to want to go back to, Washington winning 8 games or Ottawa winning 12 or whatever it was. But I don't think a lot of guys are going to say, I'm not doing that again. I mean, they ran all that money in the postseason, and we didn't get a shot at it.
Well, they've already committed to the same rules for Seattle.
I mean, that's what they're saying, but I'll be surprised. Wouldn't you be surprised, though, if it gets altered somewhat? I think,
yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised because I just think, Fleury notwithstanding, I mean, Halla was on the third line. Neal was on a second line in Nashville. I mean, you basically put together another NHL team. So, and I don't know, Vegas, I think, just because of the nature of that city, probably draws a lot more attention for the league than Seattle might. If they have the same rules, that's fine. I mean, it may create a similar situation, but I'd be stunned if every owner says, yeah, I'm just going to agree to that. I think they're going to alter it to some degree somehow. But, I mean, I just missed the Expos in terms of being cognizant about this stuff. It's funny, though. I would have picked the
So you're saying we're old. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm almost as old as you guys. But, I mean, I remember seeing the Expos maybe. I saw them in Philadelphia in 1971, but their first year I don't remember very well. I know about it. I've read about it, all that kind of stuff. But in terms of the best franchise, I think that can be given credit for is the Florida Panthers in 1993-94. They did not have the rules that Las Vegas did. They really had a bunch of no-names, Scott Mellenby and Brian Scrudlin, probably the biggest forwards. Now, they did get Van Beesbrook, so it was similar to the Fleury situation. But, I mean, they finished 1 point out of a playoff spot and almost made it and beat a lot of good teams, including Pittsburgh a number of years ago. So, to me, that was a tremendous job by, I think, Doug McLean was the coach. I think it might have actually been Bill Torrey, who obviously is a Hall of Fame executive. But that was a tremendous job in an era that they didn't help NHL. I mean, Ottawa and some other teams came in, and they didn't do anywhere near they didn't have anywhere near the success that the Florida Panthers did that first year. They couldn't sustain it. They did get to the finals, I think, 3 or 4 years later.
Yeah, 97.
Colorado. But you talk about success in a much different set of conditions. Thinking back, that was a pretty amazing first year. I was old enough and I was cognizant enough and a little more mature. I remember the 77 Toronto Blue Jays. And weird ballpark. It snowed all the time in April, and they were awful. I think they ended up losing 107 games. I think for the first month, if I recall, they were 500. And Doug Auld hit the ball all over the place.
Yeah.
Do you remember those guys? I mean, they were kind of like the Expos, weren't quite the same cool uniforms, and didn't have the same kind of intense following. But I remember following them pretty much every step of the way, and I think they were just kind of a personal favorite from that standpoint. The Mariners started the same year, but you didn't see a lot of them on TV. Growing up in the East here, I saw a lot of Toronto, and they started out like a house on fire, and then they completely fell through the floor and really struggled for years after that. But I kind of leaned to them just because, I don't know, for one reason or another, that was my first true expansion, so I paid a lot of attention to what they were doing. And it took a lot of work to do that when you lose 107 games. So,
Now, Fletch, I'm sure you were a Seattle Pilot man.
Oh, I was. It was home of the great Jim Bouton too. Was it not?
Absolutely. One of the great first eye-opening books you've probably ever read.
Well, and it's also one of the great uniforms too. Remember they had that little pilot thing on their caps too. It was a very, very nice team. Then they became the Milwaukee Brewers after one season. But for me, though, I'm going to go completely opposite of you guys. To me, the most memorable of the expansion teams were the 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's a team that went 0-14.
Yep.
They didn't score in 5 games. They didn't score a touchdown to their 4th game.
Wasn't the Rat the quarterback for a while?
And the other thing too is those creamsicle uniforms. They were spectacular.
They were different. Yes,
and
they were.
And at the time, I'm sure you guys had this game too. I had the Tudor electric football. The little vibration thing going on.
You had a Buccaneers team.
I had a Buccaneers team. I went out and I ordered a Buccaneers team.
Who was it? Who was it? Was it Mike Ray was the first quarterback? It wasn't Hayden, was it? It was Mike.
No. Well, they had Terry Hanratty as a quarterback.
Hanratty played
Steve Spurrier.
Yeah.
I remember a low number.
You're right.
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
They were awful.
They were completely awful, and they also the rest of the league hated them because, well, mostly the coaching staff hated them because they went out and they got John McKay from the college game.
Yep.
And he was so arrogant about it, and they paid him more than most. He was making like $750,000 as the head coach for Tampa Bay, which was unheard of at that time. And but the thing that he was worth, he was the funniest head coach in NFL history. I mean, one of the great quotes came from him when after a game where his team, was just one of their typical feudal outputs. A reporter said, "What do you think of the execution of your offense?" And his reply was, "I'm all for it," which I thought was still one of the great lines of all time.
He was funny. Yeah, he was funny. You're right, Fletch, thinking about that.
But they were also probably the most important expansion team because their futility changed how expansion would work for all teams in all leagues. I mean, because of what happened, that it really was an overreaction to that you have a case like the Golden Knights. That just think about how bad to that Tampa Bay team. They were last in the league in points scored, touchdowns, and rushing touchdowns. They were only close in one game that year, and it was unbelievable.
Yeah. But you also give credit. 4 years later, they were in the NFC Championship game.
That's exactly true.
They were,
and they lost to the LA Rams. They didn't allow the Rams to score a touchdown in that game, and they had some great players on that first team too, like Leroy Selman, but he was hurt pretty much that whole year. But I mentioned that the rest of the league really hated John McKay. I mean, there was a game they were playing against Denver, and Denver was crushing them like 38 points. And in the fourth quarter, they run a reverse. So that there's some hatred that's involved in there. And then, the quarterbacks included the Steeler cast-off Terry Hanratty and then Steve Spurrier, who, he was a decent backup for the 49ers and John Brody. And they had all this great promise when they brought him into Tampa Bay, and I think he led the league in short hopping receivers. I don't know what it was, but that was certainly a memorable team.
Well, he was getting hit a lot, Fletch. He was, he's probably a little skittish back there, so.
Oh, man.
Probably a little quickly when you get hit that much, so.
And they also lost the next 12 games the second season. So they started 0-26.
26, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and I never thought about it, Fletch, but I got to agree with you. You're right. That probably did have an influence as the money went up and the TV became important and all the stuff we're talking about today with baseball. You're probably right. That probably did change how people looked at it. Like you can't have this because it's a joke, and you don't want that kind of doormat. And honestly, you lose people quickly when you do that. It took a lot of years for them. I remember that NFC Championship game against the Rams. I think it was out west, but one of their playoff games, there was a lot of empty seats.
Yeah.
After they got Doug Williams, and I can't remember who they put. It was Ricky Bell was there, I think. He was a USC guy too, wasn't he? The running back.
Yeah, before he got held after, but
right. But they had a lot of empty seats because they were so bad. It took a long while for them to recover from that inauspicious but entertaining start, so to speak.
But you know what? John McKay came in and he said, and he was right. He said the only promise he made that he would beat what he called Pittsburgh's timetable when it came to winning a championship, because at the time, it was 41 years for the Steelers and they still hadn't won one. So.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, and they did do. Even then, it wasn't as many teams, but you're better off being really bad. I mean, if you really got to turn it around, be bad. Don't be in the middle. And that's hard for the fans to swallow sometimes, but particularly now when you're talking 30 franchises. I mean, most of the time it seems, even in the NHL or the NBA, you get down to that 24th or 25th player. It's not an impact player anymore.
No.
So if you're drafting in that 12 to 26, you got to get lucky somewhat, or hope you strike, lightning, because it's really going to take a while to build that way.
Yeah.
And but it's just too many franchises, and that was kind of the start of that, I think, too. That was Seattle came in the same time. Now they actually did a lot better Jim Zorn and Largent, those guys. Didn't they come in the same year?
They did, and that was
better.
They did well, and they had success quicker. But you know, he certainly built a great defense towards the end of the '70s. And,
did.
They ended up getting to that game.
Yep.
But they certainly. But yeah, that is a great point, Fletch. That did change the way they looked at. That's exactly.
Yeah, it is.
But we're going to go to our speed round now. So
right.
First thing is going to be our memorable moments of the week. For me, it was watching Justify in the Belmont win the Triple Crown. This horse had so much against him starting. It had been 1882 was the last time a 2-year-old or a horse won the Kentucky Derby without racing as a 2-year-old. Then he comes in and he basically his career is 111 days, where he had 4 races in 111 days, which was his career. So he wins the first 2, the last 1 mile and a half, which is just it is the most trying by far of the races. And you've got a bunch of horses in there who chose not to run the second leg of the Triple Crown, so they were a little fresher. He gets the rail. Nobody had won on the rail since, I believe, 2003, and nobody had won a Triple Crown from the rail since Secretariat. And then you were facing the nobody finished undefeated in the Belmont since Seattle Slew. So he had a lot going against him. And that race was just, it was just a beautiful race to watch. He goes to the front, he gets in the second position and just holds it the entire mile and a half, which is next to impossible. Not even Secretariat held the lead for the entire race, although, you know, the finish of that race is still probably in 73 with Secretariat is still probably the most amazing thing I've ever seen in sports.
Yep.
Blowing Sham away that much that quickly at the end of the race, because Sham had the lead a little over halfway into the race that day. But anyways, Justify, in my mind, no, he's not in the ballpark with Secretariat, and I'd probably put him a little behind Seattle Slew, but he goes down as one of the great horses of all time in my eyes. So Gary, what was your
I mean, that would be mine too. You know, I think it happens so rarely. I mean, it's amazing how they happen in clusters. You know, there was 3 in the 40s, there was 2 in the 70s, now there's 2 in the teens, and there's all these gaps in between. But yeah, I actually, I mean, I'm not an expert at this. I'd like to be, and I think, you know, as I get more time in my life, I will spend more time on it. But I don't remember somebody seeming, at least to me, to an uneducated eye, getting better during those 3 runs. I thought the first run in the slop in Kentucky, he kind of won that, but he didn't really blow anything away. And people say, oh, it's a big horse and it's trained well by, I guess it was Baffert and all that stuff. But yeah, he looked okay. I thought in the second run, I thought he got better and better. I mean, and that was sloppy too down in Baltimore. He kind of didn't lead there, but he came on, and down the stretch, I thought he was just phenomenal. Right. Kind of started blowing everybody away. If that race would have been a little longer, he would have won that by more than 4 or 5 lengths. And then, yeah, I mean, I don't know, Dave. You're right. I don't remember the details you do back in the 70s, but I don't remember anybody leading wire to wire in that longest race like that. And that's after getting better in the first 2. So it's kind of hard not to make that the most memorable moment of the week. I guess as a 1A, I'd put the Capitals finally winning. And the way that they did it in a dominant fashion, I'd probably have to pick that second on whatever it was Wednesday night. But it kind of pales in comparison to what we saw in that horse race as a sports fan, in my mind. So I'm with you on that one.
Absolutely. Fletch?
Well, you guys know that I'm a big softie, right? You know, me, Mr. Sensitivity, in touch with my feminine side. You know, I feel things, boys. You know that.
We know.
So my memorable moment is 31 years in the making. Guys, have any guesses of what that is?
31 years in the making. I'm going to guess something with a tennis tournament, maybe?
Well, you know, Dave, be prepared to cry. And, you know, with that nose of yours, you better have a lot of tissues. That's all I'm going to say.
I got a big nose, buddy.
And Gary, I know you're a heartless bastard, so you may want to just like go to the front door, yell at the kids to get off the lawn at this point, you know, just so you.
Come on, Fletch. I'm a fan.
So I'm not going to tug at your heart or anything, but This week, the Washington Redskins replacement players finally got their Super Bowl ring from the championship in the strike season of 1987. The 25 of their players got rings. So, those replacement players, keep in mind, guys, those guys went 3-0, and they were a big reason that team was able to qualify and make the postseason.
They were the inspiration of one of the great movies of all time, The Replacement.
Oh, there you go. They beat the Cardinals, they beat the defending Super Bowl champion Giants, and the Cowboys on the Monday Night Football game. So they did all of that. The players did get a share of the Super Bowl money that year. I think they got something like 26 grand. But but they were never acknowledged with a ring. So that wrong has been righted. And it was a great quote. It was a great quote.
You're having a hell of a show here. I mean, you've taught us all about why the expansion drafts have changed, and now you must have feeds coming from everywhere, because quite frankly, I never even heard such a thing. So I'm impressed. I am impressed.
He's like an onion. He's like an onion.
That is amazing. Yeah.
Okay, now I want you guys to hold back the tears, because this is the one that's going to cap it. So Doug Williams, who was a quarterback for that Redskins team, he is now, I think, their VP of player personnel, and this is the quote that I got from him. We were grateful that they won those games. You have to take your hat off to these guys because they lived a part of their dream, too, to play in the National Football League. And it's only fair that they get the same opportunity that a lot of other guys get. You may now sob, Dave. You may now sob.
Oh, my gosh. I put the phone on mute for a second. Oh, man.
Well, Williams was the captain of some of those teams, so maybe he truly felt that way. Or maybe somebody from the PR department gave him that. But whatever. It's a nice thing to say, at least. So,
I'm thinking anything that can hide a Daniel Snyder move will
correct.
Will be good for the franchise.
Absolutely.
All the casinos and the people who own the casinos may actually get off the Redskins now to change the logo and the colors and everything else. So maybe
exactly.
There you go.
Okay, and our last on our speed round, the bold prediction of the week. I'm going to go. Last week I gave you my quarterfinal picks in the World Cup as it begins tomorrow with the godless Russian team starting out. And my final four. This week I'll do the final four, which will be Spain, Germany, the upset, England in a semifinal, which hasn't happened in eons, and France. It is at all Europe. Final four in the World Cup. Gary.
Well, first of all, you guys need to send me some kind of communication about when my favorite team, Colombia, is playing. That I guess you referred to last week. So I need to tune that in. That's the first request I have for you guys. But I don't know. I'm weak at this part of my game here. I think that there's two big series coming up next week in baseball. Mm-hmm. Seattle comes into the Yankees to play 3 games next week, and the Cubs actually go out to the Dodgers next week. I think my fearless prediction is I think Seattle and the Cubs are going to go into those 2 series, and I think they're going to win those series. I'm not sure they're going to sweep it, but I think they're going to play better baseball. I think Seattle's going to be proving that they're probably for real in that series. I think they're going to go in and win that series versus the Yankees. So I don't know how fearless that is, but those are the best I can come up with.
There you go. So. Now, Fletch, I gave you an extra moment to compose yourself after that last statement. So, what is your fearless prediction of the week?
Well, Dave and Gary, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and it all revolves around the Pirates' attendance. And the Pirates, fearing that loss of attendance, are going to announce a new promotional night. And boys, it's going to be a really realistic one. So I ask you both, are you ready for double eye patch night? And that's the only way to watch this disappointing squad is with the double eye patch.
That's good. I wish I had the double eye patch today.
We all wish we had the double eye patch last night on the 4th or 5th.
Oh,
jeez.
My God, something tells me my chili pierogi hot dog burger that I'll get at the stadium with 2 eye patches might not end up in my mouth.
Well, Fletch, when that happens and that promotion happens, you'll have to let us know. That's assuming some of us aren't there already at times. So.
Well, if it happens, boys, I think I should be throwing out the first pitch.
I think you should. With your double eye patch.
With my double eye patch, and I'll still hit the plate, unlike Vasquez today in that last inning.
It wouldn't be any worse than Neverauskas was sometimes when he tried to go 100 miles an hour.
Man.
So, right.
Oh man. All right. Well, that's good. Next week we'll learn Fletcher's most disgusting food he's ever eaten at a ballpark.
Oh, where do I start?
Oh man. Well, next week I want to hear that because I've seen what the stuff you've eaten in the past, and I don't think that's the worst of what you've done.
There are some things that should remain between the lines. Let's just say that.
Between your God and you, my friend. Oh man. All right, gentlemen. Been a fun evening.
All right, gentlemen. Thanks to both of you. Interesting, stimulating conversation again.
I think Fletcher's too stimulated at this point, but
I'm weeping. You're interrupting my weeping.
Oh, a sensitive man. All right, guys. We'll see you later.
Talk to you later.